How are we all doing? Holding up out there? All right. So good afternoon, everybody. Like Akshar said, my name is Jonna. I am an executive recruiter with Randstad North America here in Chicago. What I do, basically, there are two main parts to my job. So companies hire me to help them hire people for their needs. So they recognize that sometimes hiring is a very challenging task. They maybe don't have the resources internally within their company to hire the best talent. So they come to me, or rather, usually I am selling my services to them, or they come to me in order to, find the best talent and hire someone for their role. So I both sell my services to companies, and I also, and the part that I love about my job the most is that I get to help people find jobs in their field that are relevant to their experience and educational background. And I coach them, I coach people and help them throughout the hiring process. So I love the part of my job where I get to truly be a career consultant. I do interview about 7 to 10 people a week in my role. And what I do is I evaluate how I might be able to help them with their job search and kind of work with them to set up a job search strategy. So when I do identify a company that would be a good fit for a candidate that I'm working with that maybe has great skills, maybe it's a niche field, I identify a company that might be a good fit for them, and I market their skills and expertise to that company. I convince that company to then bring them in for an interview, or at least schedule an initial phone interview. And so then I schedule an interview with that company and coach them through the interview process. I also get feedback directly from companies and share that with the candidates that I work with. So it's kind of an ongoing consulting service that I provide. I'm also a liberal arts major through and through. I graduated in 2013 from Brandeis University with my bachelor's in a double major in American history and anthropology with a minor in classical studies. So I don't have a super technical background. I currently recruit HR professionals, so I work with companies to fill their HR needs. But I definitely have some just good general advice about interviews, about how to interview in general. So so this is my company, Randstad. This is me looking really happy at work in front of our company logo at the front desk. So I'm just going to go over and just do an overview of what we're going to talk about today. So first we're going to talk about what is an interview, what are characteristics of an interview, what are some different types of interviews, and then we're going to talk about how to market your skills and knowledge to be effective in an interview and convince someone that they should hire you. And then we're going to talk about how to demonstrate your interest in a company or in a job in an interview setting. We'll also discuss professional presentation, what that might mean in all different contexts, and then appropriate follow-up after your interviews, which some people hit on some relevant topics earlier today with emailing and following up and trying to schedule informational interviews. And then we'll also talk about working with a recruiter like myself in what we call in the industry, I'm an agency recruiter rather than an internal recruiter who works in a corporate setting and just recruits for one company. So I recruit for hundreds of companies in an agency. And then we'll talk about some tough interview questions and how to some strategies that you might use to deal with that. I'd also like to point out that I'm not really talking, some people mentioned earlier informational interviews. I'm not talking about those really, although some of those skills might be transferable. I'm talking primarily about an interview that you get for an actual job, not just kind of an informational conversation with someone in your industry of choice. Alrighty. So what is an interview? What are some characteristics of an interview? For one thing, it's a sales pitch. You're pitching yourself. You're trying to sell or market yourself to convince an employer that they should pay you to do what you do best and what you like to do. It's not an easy task. So it's kind of, and another characteristic of an interview is that it can sometimes be a little bit unnatural. That's okay. It's kind of it's a very contrived setting where you're going in and you clearly have a clear objective and a goal, and your interviewer also has a clear objective and goal in the process, and it's a test. So it's also a networking opportunity. It's a chance to meet someone in a field that you're interested in a company that you're interested in. So always can think of it as a networking opportunity, and you've already done a lot of networking to get to that point, but the networking doesn't stop when you get an interview. And then it's a test. So it's a test of both your soft skills and your hard skills, your technical skills. So that includes communication skills, emotional intelligence, your teamwork, and adaptability, and not only that, but your problem solving, critical thinking, and conflict resolution skills. So, and different people throughout the interview process are going to be looking for different kinds of skills. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but you may have an initial interview with someone who is a recruiter at the company rather than the person who would be the hiring manager, who would eventually be your boss if you were to get hired for the position. So you might you might initially talk to someone who has a title like corporate recruiter or HR generalist or HR business partner or talent acquisition partner or something to that effect. And we'll talk about it a little later, but just understand the difference between meeting with someone who is a recruiter, who's kind of the face of the company, versus meeting with the actual hiring manager who will be making the final decision about who gets hired. So it's also, I would say it's also, let me go back a little bit. It's an elimination process. I know that sounds a little bit daunting, but an interview is an elimination process, and you have to set yourself apart just by being, putting your best face forward and hoping that that is good enough to land you the job, and kind of putting things in place to make sure that you are the one that stands out the most. And that's not always going to happen, but like I said, an interview is a networking opportunity. It's always a good thing to practice, and hope, and eventually an interview will result in a job. So now we'll talk about types of interviews. The first type that I want to talk about, which will likely be the first type of interview that you would experience, would be a phone interview. Most companies these days don't bring you in person for the first interview as a first interview. They will kind of want to do a screen to see how you are on the phone, especially if it's a job where you're going to be on the phone a lot. But not necessarily that. I mean, it's basically it's a lower commitment of their time. It's a lesser commitment of their time to talk to you on the phone and kind of get some key concepts out of the way before they take the time to bring you into their office. So some tips for a phone interview: you want to be in a quiet place. If you're on a cell phone, make sure you get good reception in the spot that you're in, and really enunciate on the phone. I can't stress that enough. Sometimes I literally talk to people all day on the phone, and it just drives me nuts when I have to keep asking people to repeat themselves, because they're not enunciating, or it's not clear, or there's a bad connection, and then you have to, and especially, if you're making, this is your first impression on a company. So definitely keep those things in mind. And then the next one is a video interview. Don't dress like this guy for a video interview, because what if you have to get up for any reason? So in a video interview, you also want to be in a quiet place, not on a beach, in a room, in a building somewhere where there's not going to be anyone around knocking at your door. Definitely dress the part, dress like you're going to an interview, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation section. But try to have, not have a ton of stuff going on behind you, just kind of a blank background, somewhere that's quiet where you can have a conversation. Make sure you have a good internet connection. And then for the in-person interview, this kind of depends on who you're meeting with, and you may be meeting with multiple people. With every single person that you meet with in an in-person interview, shake their hand very firmly when you go in. Make sure that you're standing up when you do that. You may be escorted to sit somewhere, and someone may come out to greet you. Make sure you stand up before you shake their hand. I know that sounds kind of silly, but it's all about the impression that you're making. It is okay to accept water if they offer it. Don't ask for anything else like coffee or juice or tea or anything, but there are conflicting opinions about that. But I say, you need to be comfortable in an interview, and if you're not going to be comfortable because you need to clear your throat and you need some water, then you need to have that water available. But yeah, anything else, they may offer coffee or something, but honestly, no one wants to brew you a cup of coffee when you come in for an interview. But water is easy. So then other types of interviews that you might encounter would be assessments of your personality and skills, so that especially for any more technical positions, they might administer a test. Like some of my candidates have to do an Excel test if you're going to be working a lot manipulating spreadsheets in Excel. You might have to do some other kind of test if you're programming or what have you. You might have to do some coding. Some interviewers will ask you to put together a short presentation on a particular topic. There could also be kind of an online test, like either a Myers-Briggs or another type of personality test that you have to just go through and answer these kind of generic questions that are like, how would you rate yourself on like your interactions with people, or just stuff like that, and you have to respond like on a scale of 1 to 5. So don't take too much stock in those. Companies don't typically make decisions based on the personality tests, but they will sometimes make decisions about whether to bring you back in for another interview or for a phone screen based on your results on like a technical test or some kind of test of your technical skills. No matter what kind of interview you're on, whether it's phone, video, in person, always do plenty of research beforehand. You're going to want to know who started the company, when the company was, when they started, what they were initially, what they initially were founded as, what kind of services they provided, how, maybe try to know a little bit about how their services may have changed over the course of time. Definitely know what they do now and what the interviewer does specifically in the company. So LinkedIn is a great resource for finding out, for looking up. Your interviewers will likely all be on LinkedIn, so you can do a little research there and find out exactly what they do. Let's see, what else? I know I know it's hard, and I hear myself doing it too, but try to also avoid filler words such as and and yeah, and whatever. It's and we all do it. I'm doing it right now. But it just, if you can try to have like a conscious understanding of not doing that, and like try to really focus in on not doing that, maybe practice it in daily conversation beforehand. And yeah, also definitely ask questions throughout the interview. You're going to have to kind of read the interviewer's style and see if they seem like they might be amenable to you asking a question. But if there's kind of a pause in the conversation, take that as an opportunity to ask or to comment on something that you just talked about. It's not, the best kind of interviews are not just like a question, answer. It's more of a conversation. So and you have some power over that too. It's not just the interviewer that is leading the conversation. So you can, feel, and you also appear a lot more confident if you are showing that, that you're listening and that you're thinking and, being very thoughtful about the conversation and that you have a question. So we're going to move on to your professional presentation. There is such a thing as arriving too early to an interview. Don't arrive, or if you arrive at the building way early because you budgeted a lot of time to get through traffic or for the train to break down, that's great. Definitely plan plenty of time to get there, but don't present yourself in the lobby and to reception or to the company if you get there more than 10 minutes early. And the reason for that is that if you get there, more than 10, 15 minutes early, your interviewer, they're taking the time out of their day to meet with you. They have a busy schedule. They might feel pressured to shift their schedule around to meet with you early. That might leave them a little bit flustered. That in and of itself is a first impression. Like, oh, this person, I felt really flustered when they came in because they showed up 40 minutes early. I know it sounds kind of silly, but just, sit in your car or sit in the parking lot or sit on a bench, or if there's a lobby where, that you can sit in the building, just kind of hang out down there until 10 minutes before your interview. It is a good idea to get there at least 5 minutes to present yourself like 5 minutes early, or just on time is fine. So we will we'll also talk about dress in a minute, but it's also a good idea to bring either like a clipboard or a nice looking notebook and take notes throughout, because you're going to need that when you write your follow-up thank you emails, which I'll talk about a little bit later as well. So then now we'll move on to dress code. You don't always have to dress in a business suit. You have to, it's really going to depend on I'd say the default interview attire is how these guys are dressed here, or the equivalent for the ladies in the room. This is considered professional dress. This is a business suit. It's a good investment for your career just to have one if you are going to be interviewing at the types of companies that require a professional dress code. However, if you're interviewing, let's say at a small tech startup, they're probably going to be more casual dress. So casual dress means more like, you can wear nice jeans or slacks, some, not sneakers, but dress, casual looking dress shoes and a collared shirt or a blouse. And it is okay to, if you try to figure out, there are numerous resources to figure out what the dress code might be, whether it's LinkedIn or their website to see, some companies have pictures of their employees on their website. You can kind of see how people are dressed. Sometimes Glassdoor will have information about that. And you kind of have to dig around through it. There's not usually a page that says, this is the dress code of the company. But do a little digging. If you can't really figure it out, that's fine. Sometimes it's hard to figure that out. It is okay to ask the person that you scheduled the interview with, hey, what is the dress code for your office? What should, not what should I wear, but like, hey, what is the dress code in your office? And they'll tell you whether it's professional or casual or somewhere in between. And you always want to dress like sort of a step up from what the people that that are interviewing you are going to be wearing. So just kind of one notch above that. And because you really need to balance feeling comfortable with looking professional. It's really, really important that you feel comfortable with what you're wearing, especially because you need to be confident in the interview process. So again, I mean, casual means collared shirt, blouse, nice jeans, maybe some slacks, no sneakers, no sandals, nothing frayed or nothing with holes in it. I think it's pretty common sense. You guys probably already know that. Then let's see. We're gonna move on to once you're there. So you've arrived. You've dressed for the part. You've gotten the interview. You've dressed for the part. You've arrived. You're sitting down with your interviewer or interviewers. Now, there are kind of two things that you're going to need to do throughout the interview, whether it's on the phone or in person. You're going to need to kind of sell yourself, your skills, your expertise, market your knowledge and skills that you've gained in your education thus far. And you're also going to need to demonstrate interest in the job and interest in the company. So first, when you are marketing yourself to an employer, you need to set set what your goals are. What do I want to accomplish in this experience, in this interview? So if you're having trouble kind of figuring out what those goals could be, a common goal is to turn that interview into a subsequent interview, whether it's turning a phone screen into an in-person interview or turning a first on-site interview to a second interview. So this takes practice, and it takes a lot of practice and work. And then another goal that you could have would be to learn more about the industry or the company, just kind of more like a networking kind of goal. And this will probably happen naturally throughout the conversation. So one thing you should do is practice talking about yourself conversationally, either with a friend or in front of the mirror if you don't want to subject your friends to that, in whatever setting that you'll be interviewing in. So if it's a phone interview, call a friend on the phone. Make sure you have a good connection, like a good cell phone connection. Practice talking about your experience in school, in your internship experience, your course experience, maybe any jobs that you've had thus far. And then you're going to want to pick out 2 or 3 major accomplishments that you have achieved either in a class, a lab, an internship, maybe an extracurricular activity. They're not like awards. It's not your GPA. It's actually tangible problems that you have solved in your experience. So and then each of these anecdotes is going to demonstrate a situation, a task, an action, and a result. So the situation, it could be a problem, it could be maybe an issue, it could be just something that you have to solve. The task is what you realized you had to do in order to solve that problem, the action that you took, and then what was the result? Were you successful? What did you learn from it? And these anecdotes don't necessarily have to be directly relevant to the industry or the job that you want. These are to demonstrate your communication skills, those soft skills that we talked about earlier, communication, critical thinking skills. For most of you, for those of you in the room that have not had full-time experience yet, you're not necessarily going to be hired for your directly relevant experience, for your experience that is directly relevant to the job. You're going to be hired on your potential to do well in this job. So that's why each anecdote doesn't necessarily need to, you don't have to agonize over it if you don't have the perfect story that exemplifies that you did this exact job in the past, because you haven't. The reality is that you haven't. So just think of some stories, some anecdotes where you really demonstrated your soft skills. So I want to do an example. I'm gonna do a sample that I might an anecdote using the STAR acronym that I might have used when I was searching for my first job. So and one thing I want to do is I want someone, and these anecdotes should be, you should try to keep it to 2 to 4 minutes tops. So I want a couple of volunteers one to time me and one to count the filler words that I'm using, because we all do it. But I just want to be aware of, someone to count the ums, the likes, and then, so that will help. When you do that, that helps you kind of be aware of it, and so you can hopefully correct that. So can I get a couple of volunteers, one person to time me? Yes, thank you. What's your name? Ariel. And someone else to count my filler words? Thank you. Sorry, what was your name? Jeeve. Okay. Alrighty, so I'm gonna give you my example. So I'm on an interview now. Now you can start the timer. I had the opportunity to work on a project in one of my anthropology classes last semester. Our instructor wanted us to conduct research in the field to work into our final project. No one in the class really had done field work before, and the professor actually left the instructions intentionally vague because they wanted us to learn that there's really no one right way to do field work in anthropology. So we needed to figure out what was the best way to conduct this research, to what data we should be collecting that would be relevant to our final project, that would kind of supplement the knowledge that we already had on the topic, and 3, how to incorporate that into the rest of our findings. So my teammates and I designed a plan to conduct a few different studies in the field and analyze the results, and then we used our findings to kind of compare and contrast this with the theory that we had studied on the topic already in class and on our own. So I personally mapped out what needed to be done and when that needed to be done, and making sure that the work was divided equitably. So what ended up happening was everyone finished their piece of the puzzle in time for us to take the time to analyze the data that we collected. Everyone got to experiment with different strategies of conducting field work, and the additional field research enhanced our understanding of the coursework. And my group ended up doing really well on the project, and our professor commented that we were like one of the best groups that had presented and seen. So can we get a time on that? 2 minutes, 9 seconds? Okay, that's good. Can we get a count on the filler words that I used? Okay. What was the total? Sorry. Okay. So I got some work to do there, but that's okay. Alrighty. So we're gonna move on. I'm not sure if we actually have time to do the break video that I had, so I'm gonna keep going on how to demonstrate your interest in an interview. So no interviewer wants to think that you're just kind of shopping around to find the best job. They want to know why you want to come and work for them. So and you have to understand also that they're going to probably be interviewing, maybe not a line this long of people for the job, but they're going to have other people in play. They're going to want to know that you have made a thoughtful decision and really in a considered and really had considered this job and why you would want to work there. So and you can do that by kind of showing that you've done your research, like we talked about before, so that they know that you're being thoughtful about this experience. And then you can also demonstrate that by having kind of a 5-year plan. And when you're asked about what you're looking for in your career, have a 5-year plan in mind. You don't need to be married to this plan. This plan will change and should change as your career progresses. But at this point, they are going to want to see that you have an idea of how this opportunity at this company will work into your 5-year plan, or maybe your 10-year plan. So you kind of need this plan to show motivation and show that you're not just kind of shopping around for any old job. And that's also important because not everyone that's interviewing for the job might have that, so that's something that can set you apart. All right, so now we're going to talk about appropriate follow-up after interviews. So again, you want to set goals here. So with your follow-up, are you trying to get a second interview? Are you trying to just thank them for their time? Most of the time, your goal might be, are you trying to get an offer from this interview? So just have your goal in mind, and then so at the end of your either your phone screen or your video. You okay? So at the end of your phone screen or your video interview or your in-person interview, you're going to want to ask what the next steps would be in the process and try to get a time frame of when you should follow up with your interviewers. So within about 24 hours of your interview, you should send thank you emails to each individual that you met with. Email each person that you met with to kind of thank them for their time, and demonstrate why what you learned and why you're excited about the role. And the other type of follow-up is you want to mark your calendar for the date that they said you could follow up by, and you want to kind of give them a time frame, like maybe follow up if they give you a time frame, follow up maybe a day or two after that time frame, because it gives the interviewer a little bit of wiggle room in case they were out of the office one day or got busier than expected. So assuming that you are interested in moving on to the next steps, reiterate why you think you'd be a good fit and what skills you have that would be relevant, and why you're excited about the role. And the last thing that you should do is personalize it and also have someone proofread it. So definitely have someone review your work. It can make or break it if you send a thank you email that is either you clearly copied and pasted the same email and sent it to everybody you met with, and it can kind of make or break it if you have like a bunch of grammatical errors in there. You need to demonstrate that that you put a lot of time, that you put time into the follow-up. And you're going to, so for follow-up interviews, so whether it's your second or third interview, you're going to kind of follow the same guidelines that we talked about earlier. You're demonstrating your interest and you're marketing your skills. So for these subsequent interviews, you also want to incorporate this wealth of information that you've learned in the first interview that you can take into the second interview to use. So maybe you learned something really cool about the company that made you really excited about the job. So you can make them aware of that in your thank you email, or you can use it as a conversation topic in your subsequent interview should you get one. And that'll show that you really you listened and you considered the opportunity and you're excited about it. So I have can I get a time check? A few minutes? Okay. So I have a few tips for working with agency recruiters like myself. They should want to meet you in person because they're going to be marketing your soft skills. Since a lot of you in the room don't have full-time experience, they're going to be marketing kind of your objective skills. And how will they be able to do that if they haven't met with you in person and explained their process and explained more about the job that the job or jobs that they're submitting your resume for, and because they're ultimately representing you and they're going to be negotiating your salary further down the line. So you should also ask whether they obtain your authorization before sending your resume to one of their clients, because you want to protect your reputation and know where your resume is being sent. You want to be able to control where your resume is being sent to. And you should definitely add, when you work with a recruiter, you should definitely add, whether they submitted your resume on that chart that we saw earlier. That was a really handy tool. And you should also ask what industries they recruit for. If you do get a call from a recruiter, you want to get a sense of whether they might actually be able to help you with your search or present you with the kinds of opportunities that you are looking for. So you want to ask them, like, what kinds of roles have you filled in the past? What industries are your main clients working in? And just kind of make sure that you're on the same page with that. And then I also want to explain how agency recruiters get paid. So basically, there is no fee to the candidate. For the candidate, how we earn our living is we kind of, similar to the way that Facebook, you give Facebook your data information about you. They then sell that, market that to advertisers. So agency recruiting is not as exploitative as that. I wouldn't say it's exploitative like that, but it's the same kind of concept where so agency recruiters have your resume, we have information about you, we've met with you, we understand what your skills are, and we then market that information about you to our companies, to our clients, in order to try to find you a job. And the fee is, we only get paid when when a company wants to hire you, they make you an offer, we help you negotiate your salary, they then pay us a fee that is usually a percentage of your starting salary. So a recruiting agency that you work with should never ever charge you a fee. They should never charge you a fee as a candidate to be placed in a job. So I think I want to move on to a couple of tough questions, and I'm not sure. I want to kind of open this up to you guys now, because I'm not sure if we have time to go through every single one of them, but I'm happy to stay after and talk to you individually. Maybe if there are any questions on here that anyone would like some advice about how to answer. Does anyone have one in particular on this list that they'd like to hear more about? Yep. Yes. Yeah, so the question. So you wanted to know a little bit more about the question, why should I hire you? Which is a great question. It's a really it's a really broad and kind of vague question. So whenever you're asked something that is kind of vague like that, that's an opportunity, like we talked about before, to market your skills. So you could say something like, well, I think you should hire me because and to demonstrate your interest in the company. I know a lot. I did a lot of research about the company. I know about what you guys do. I'm on board with your mission, and I think I think you should hire me because and then go through one of the anecdotes that we talked about with the situation, a task, an action, and a result, and demonstrate why you have the skills that you would need to succeed in the job. And you can also use that question as an opportunity to then ask, if you haven't established this already, what are the skills and requirements that you're looking for in a candidate? Any other questions that people want me to cover on this list, or any other questions in general? You in the back? Yep. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So that's a great question. The question was, how do you handle the question about salary expectations, and when do you bring that up in the process? So you kind of have to use your judgment on this. Typically if you're asked in like a first interview, hey, what are your salary expectations? That's not a great time to bring that up because they don't know anything about you yet. You don't know anything about the job yet. That can, and we go back to the kind of elimination process, the elimination process aspect of an interview. Asking about salary, asking about your salary expectations in the beginning might be kind of jumping the gun a little bit, and it could be used as a tactic to eliminate you from the process. So if you're asked that, like in a phone screen, just kind of say, I'm really interested in learning more about this opportunity. I'm flexible, I'm open as to salary, and I'm sure if I were made an offer, I would consider any reasonable or competitive offer. So you generally, if you're talking about you bringing up salary expectations, save that for toward the end of the process, because you want to when you go into that conversation about salary, you want to be armed with a wealth of information about the company, the job, what the expectations would be for you going into this job. And you don't want to start that conversation too early in the process because of that. So, typically the company will bring it up first. You can certainly, if it gets to the point where it's clear, I would say don't bring up salary as a candidate until you've gotten to a point where it's clear that they want to make you an offer, where they've verbalized that they want to hire you. Yep. Mm-hmm.
What do you think we should focus in more on that? So this is my name, this is my education, these are my skills, this is the kind of projects and the kind of roles I'm being involved with? Or should we take it more to the personal side and say, this is where I come from, this is my story, this is my motivation, my interest? So more on the technical side or on the personal side of it?
I would say kind of a mix of the two. So, that's just my opinion. I think, you never want to get too personal in an interview. Any kind of personal detail that you share should have a purpose to it. So don't tell them about your dogs if you can't tie that into something that's relevant to the process. But yeah, definitely tell them, about your educational background, tell them your story, what your motivations are, especially if that is relevant to the job. That'll kind of put a personal touch to it and show that you have indeed, made a thoughtful decision about why you wanted to interview with them in the first place. And then you can kind of go into telling them more about your technical skills using the situation, task, action, result model. In the back? Yeah. So question 4, where do you see yourself in X amount of years? That So I think the question, I just want to make sure I understand your question. So you're asking how could you respond if you were asked where do you see yourself in 5 years at this company? So kind of like what we talked about a little bit earlier, with the kind of demonstrating your interest and work this job into kind of your, like, create kind of a 5-year plan for yourself, even if you're not totally, you don't have to, like I said, you don't have to be married to that plan, but just kind of have an idea of, well, I'd like to, gain some experience over the next 3 years doing, X, Y, and Z. And then after that, I'd like to progress in this industry and become a more senior leader or become a manager. And then, after 5 years, I'd like to become a director of, whatever field you're in. And like I said, you don't have to be married to that plan, but it shows that you are really thinking about your career and where you see yourself in the future, especially with that company. So I think we're probably out of time, but I think we're probably out of time, but do we have time for a couple more questions or? Okay, sounds good. Thank you guys very much.